Hey guys, it's me, EODGamer here, and today we're back with another Honkai Star Rail Memory of Chaos guide video. I have here the second half. You guys really requested for this one, but I was very busy with work, like in real life work, so I didn't have time to make this proper video as well. So I have here 6 all the way to 10. We'll go into each one individually. I'll leave timestamps in the video card below as well. So just go ahead and like click on the part that you are struggling with. I'll give you as much tips as I can and hopefully add in also some combat for the harder stages too. I'm not gonna lie to you and say that any character, any team composition, you can just use it, slap it on and clear it easily. As you can see here, I have all of the characters in the game at least at level 70 and tried in most permutation and combinations of like team combination, putting them in certain orders. And what I feel is that there are certain characters that do a little bit better and some are worse. Of course, I'm missing Clara here. That's the only character I don't have on my account. Some characters do better, some characters are going to do worse. I'll make a tier list video in future, but basically I'm going to teach you more importantly like the mechanics and broad tips on how to tackle the content as well. So for the most part, there are 2 types of situations. There are the people who are trying to go for max 30 stars, and there are the people who just want to clear the stage. So very 2 different group of people. If you are just aiming to like clear the stage, this video definitely will help you clear the stage as much as you can. Of course, if you're trying to like max stars, I think that no matter what I say will not help you. Maybe it'll help you in terms of mechanics and break through earlier, but by and large, to get the max 30 stars really is dependent on your gear and resources as well. So with that disclaimer and the broad perspective out of the way, let's take a look at first Memory of Chaos 6. I think this is the first stage that we actually enter that one boss mechanic, and it starts getting a lot more challenging, mainly because of this abundant abundeer. For those of you who are struggling with this boss specifically, I have a link in the video card above, or the specific boss mechanics. I won't be talking about it in this video, like what to do when the boss does this, what to do when the boss does that. I highly recommend you like open it in another tab and check it out if you guys are struggling in this stage. Basically, what do I recommend for the first as well as the second set? For the first half is actually pretty straightforward. You have these 2 Searing Prowler as well as Automaton Direwolf. What works well is, of course, Lightning, Ice works really well, as well as imaginary characters. So I'll give you a couple of choices to have as your main DPS. You can go for Yanqing if you have him. You can go for Weld if you have him as well. These work really well. If you have Jingyuan, use him in the first half. He's going to be much stronger as well. And for those of you maybe playing, for example, Ireland, or if you don't play Ireland and you play Servile, this is where you want to actually play your first set as well. Other than that, it's pretty straightforward. I would say the first half, not too major, is more or less an easy start. The part that is becoming a little bit tricky is the second part, the Abundant Abundeer. This one's a bit tougher because you really need to understand what is the thing that makes it hard. There are 2 main things. I'll just summarize it for you. There's one creep he summons that, for example, has a healing ability. So you want to take down that healing unit as quickly as you can. So this stage is more of like addressing the enemy small mob spawns that he summons. That's like the main part. The second thing is being able to withstand a one-shot from him. I felt that somewhere around 2.9k HP for my Silver Wolf and Pella kind of stats were able to survive the one-shot. You can watch the video that I recommended, it's in the video card above. You can check it out. There is a clip that I show you like me surviving the one-shot and what are the stats I have broadly. So that is for this part. In terms of characters that I recommend, I think characters like Qingque here will be very, very strong because Quantum is super strong. Of course, if you have Zealer, you have Silver Wolf, all these 3 characters work very well here. Because of the very, very strong quantum weakness in the Abundeer, as well also in the this Arumutan Gatekeeper. It's not as strong as the later stages one, but it is a pretty pain to get through as well, so you definitely want to try to take it down. Other than that, here it says Ice and as well as Fire, but I don't really think you want to play like a main DPS Ice and Fire here, because you will want to put it in your first set if you had Ice. And Fire, I think most people will probably be playing like Fire MC or Esta if you're using them just to take down a bit of the break damage. But by and large, Quantum is probably my recommendation to go in. If you really don't have Quantum and you don't have Silver Wolf, you could just cheese to put in a weakness. But if you don't have Quantum and you're really struggling with this stage, what I would recommend you do is definitely play in Fire, and you might want to run, for example, a certain characters that you have built. If you have Hook, it's probably going to be a lot easier. But if you don't want to build Hook, you don't want to build like Himiko and stuff like that, your other option really is to go with Ice, which means that you will be forced to run your Ice main DPS here in the second set. Perhaps you have like Yanqing here, and your first set here, maybe you can, instead of run Yanqing, you can run with a lightning DPS instead. So maybe you have Jingyuan in the first half as well. So just split out your roster. The second half is really the hard part for this stage. And yeah, I hope those information helped you a little bit. Other than that, I don't see any important one. And this is the one that I was mentioning. This is the one that heals, the one with the flowers as well. Okay, so now that it's like Memory of Chaos 6, the broad tips to focus on. Memory of Chaos 7 is, I would say, let me just see the monsters again real quick. Okay, Memory of Chaos 7 is not very hard. I think that the harder ones in this cycle or for 1.1 rotation will be 6, 8 as well as 10. I think 7 and as well as the other one here, 9 is not as difficult. Let me explain why in a little bit. So first things first, Blazer of Space as well as Guardian Shadow. These two are not very difficult mobs to kill. Most of us have already encountered them in 1.0 and probably are used to them in the overworld as well. So boss mechanics, I won't touch on that. What you want to play, definitely if you have a physical character, if you have, for example, like, where is my Susang? Susang is here. You have Clara, which I don't have on this account. You have Silver Wolf, Ting Chues, and the like. All of these characters are of course very strong here. I think Quantum as well as Physical here, as they recommend, because they address every single, like, the two bigger bosses. So definitely these two are very, very helpful to clear this setup as well. Other than that, in the second half, I don't really think it's like super big of a deal, so I'm just going to breeze through it real quick. In the nice part of this floor, why I say it's pretty easy, is the bosses aren't too hard, and also if you can see the typing here is like ice and lightning. So if basically you're playing, for example, your Yuanqing, you're playing Jingyuan, you're playing, for example, a Serval here, or maybe you're playing even an Ice Pella. So the comps are pretty distributed, and most of us will have at least like one in each set, since Jingyuan, Yanqing, Ice and Lightning were probably quite popular elements, as well as Physical and Quantum were quite popular elements as well. If you find yourself struggling in this stage, likely is because you don't have any one of like maybe these 8 characters or any of the elemental typings here, and I highly encourage you like at least build one out of these 4 elements, because they are pretty common elements so far from what I see in version 1.1, and you will probably be using them in a little bit as well, and you will need to bring them to the end game. So if any of these characters, do consider, especially if you're struggling with this stage. For healers in this part, I don't think it's very important. What you want to take note of is this monster summons these explosive spiders. So what you want to do is actually have good amounts of AoE in your setup, so that you can make use of their explosion and maybe also like deal more attrition damage from the side mob, so it increases your DPS if you're trying to go for that 3 stars as well. So that is like some broad tips to consider. Blaze out of space here, not like much tips to have here. It's pretty straightforward for this one. Most of the time you're going to go for a bit more damage if you're trying to run for 3 stars, which means ideally you want to run for a 3 DPS or a 2 DPS, and maybe or maybe let me just put it in, it's easier to see rather than me like being just very descriptive. So I'll use Zila as like the main DPS here, and for example Yanqing. If you are trying to aim for 3 stars in not just like clear the content, maybe you are more confident of progressing even further, what you want to do especially in version 1.1, if you're not in the last section yet, you're still in the debuff section, you want to run with a debuffer in your second slot, so you can get a bit of defense shred on the enemy. It's basically like a pseudo attack buff. And if you're confident in your survivability, especially in like the lower tier floors, you could run for example, an attack buffer here as well. Like you can run Tingyun, you can run Yukong here, or if you have Bronya, you can run Bronya here as well. So you get both defense shred as well as attack buff for your main DPS. You will be clearing very quickly. Of course, you have to be slightly well built. If you're just like scrapping the floor, you will realize that you can't really survive, and you'll be relying a lot on your 4th slot. In that case, I think of course the blessed in slot healers there are like Lota as well as Japat right now, in terms of if you just want one tank. If you are running, for example, maybe Natasha, or perhaps you're running Fire MC, you probably need to run a double, which means you either sacrifice your attack buffer, or for example you sacrifice your defense shredder. And for currently in 1.1, I would recommend you sacrifice a little bit more on the damage buffer side of things if you wanted to maximize the debuff on the enemies. For the Memory of Chaos imprinting here, as you can see, it benefits from more debuffs on the enemy. So those are some like broad tips that I have so far for Memory of Chaos 7. Pretty straightforward, I would say. Memory of Chaos 8 is actually surprisingly hard. And the reason that it's actually becoming hard is because of these Void Ranger Tramplers, as well as, I think it's the Void Ranger Tramplers that were actually the difficult ones for this set. I don't think the second half was really tough. These guys do a lot of damage, especially when you're just entering it for the first time, Memory of Chaos 8. You would think that it's this guy here, this like Disciples of Sanctus Medicus, that is the hard one, but it's actually not, because how you counter this character is just bring in Pella, or bring in Luota. Basically anyone that removes buffs will do it very well. If you don't have either, maybe you're just unlucky with your pulls, what you want to do is when he summons those two side mobs, break them once, like kill them off once, let them enter that revive, that healing aura will dissipate. So you want to aim the side mobs first, then going for him directly. I think that will be tons of value if you don't have these two characters. If you leave him on his healing, you'll realize that this stage is near impossible to clear as well. Very, very difficult. And some of you might be looking at this elemental typing and you realize that you might not have Win, which in this case I don't have a Win here. My Danheng is no longer very well built. My Sampo is also like kind of meh. Right now in 1.1 we don't really have other Win options as well. So I would say that this one you don't really need to care about secondary typing. If you have Yukong, definitely she's going to do a little bit more break damage. But for the most part, I like Yanting against this boss here, because most of the time if you're running in without Luota, you'll probably be running with a double ice. For Pella, so that she can strip the buffs off of this guy, defense break the whole enemy as well, good amounts of ice and freeze from Yanting if you are lucky too. So those are some things. I think this is a pretty strong combo going into this part. The second half really, most likely most of you are going to probably run like Fire MC in the second set because of the ability to break the fire weaknesses. If you were to have Win, where would I prefer Win? Because here both of them are being placed, I would actually recommend Win in the second half if you are playing Win. Generally the first half is addressed quite well with ice on its own. Of course, the exception will be these Void Ranger Tramplers. I think that physical will be the other option to go if you're not bringing ice, because you are really only just fighting this one guy, which is not weak to physical. But the Void Ranger Tramplers here are the hard ones to get by, and you really want a good amounts of DPS on them. Sampo is quite underrated, and I think he's going to be really strong here. If you like him, maybe you have him built, you want to play Kafka in future, might not be a bad idea taking him up to do a bit more of like break damage, attrition damage on the side for this floor. So Sampo is a good consideration. You could of course run Susang. She does very well here, together with Clara also. So those are like some broad options for the DPS category. For the defensive section, I think Luota in this half is definitely much better than the second half. Other than that, I think you want a bit of survivability in shielding, because these guys do a lot of damage. So if you have a shielder or a defense reduction or defense damage reduction on your team, you definitely want them in the first half, because these guys do a lot of damage. So maybe, for example, if you have Japat, I think he's very well suited here, especially since some of the bosses here are weak to ice as well. Good amounts of shielding. March 7 could work better in the first set, and it also has a damage reduction to the whole team. That's just some things that you want to consider as well. Other than that, if maybe you have an emergency panic button, Natasha could be good, because when one of them deals their skill, you can at least like ultimate heal it up, and then the other guy does that attack and storm as well. So those are some things to consider. You want Cleanse to remove away any of the quantum debuff that they put on you too. So those are just some broad tips for Memory of Chaos 8. I think 8 is really a DPS check. You just need to have, similarly for the other ones, the ideal to how I felt that it was much easier to push to 3 stars was going with 1 DPS, as well as 1 attack buffer, 1 defense buffer. It doesn't have to be these characters in this order, but for 1.1, the meta seems to be dropping debuffs on the enemy and having an attack buffer to just increase your damage to get the 3 stars, because most likely you'll be able to kill off enemies quicker than you are sustaining damage. So your last slot tends to be an okay defender. Of course, great if you have like Japat, Luota, Bailu, but I think some stages you will find that you can get by with like a comp like this if you can burst down the enemies quick enough. So those are some things to consider as well. Now next up we have Memory of Chaos 9, and 9 is actually not so hard. I actually felt it was pretty manageable compared to 10, which I think is a lot harder as well. One of the reasons is we already encountered Cocolia many times, so many of us are already either have like a fire character build, and she's weak to many common elements, like the first 1.0's main characters were both lightning and quantum, so it's pretty straightforward for this setup. If you have Zila, play her in the second half. it's much better to play Jingyuan in the first half, or you could play them together, but I don't think most of you want. If you only chose one, let's just say that general, not everyone's like a whale and has every character. If you have Jingyuan or you have Zealer, you want to play them the second set, but if you are whale or maybe you're lucky, you want to play them separately, Jingyuan on the first slot will be better. For those of you who are just following through instead of like looking at the icons and skipping through the parts. If you're finding value in this video so far, do like and subscribe. I really try to break it down as simply as I can. I try to be honest with you. I don't want to tell you like you can just slap any character and just big damage, win, and max clear. That's not the reality of it. In the early game now, 1.1 still, a lot of it comes from your gear quality, and that is something very important. And I'll be really honest that it's not easy for me, even a spender on the game. It's quite tough as well. If you get like the wrong combo or you time it wrong, you can still lose the match and you have to restart. So those are some honest feedback that I have. But back to the content, I think the first half, again, whenever you see this Sanctus Medicus guy, just know that Yanting is always a very good addresser for this character. He has a chance of freeze, he's weak against ice also, so you slowly take him down to that level. Pella is also very strong here, Lota is very strong here because of the ability to remove his buffs. If you have either one of these characters built, this one should be more or less like a joke. It's really not too difficult, especially since the major bosses here are weak to both ice as well as imaginary damage. So these three probably will be my like top picks. Jepat will probably be in the first slot as well. So this setup is very specific if you want to clear it very well. If you have Welt also in the first half, definitely, as you can see, is recommended imaginary. So how I think about it is always like the main two bosses, what are their weaknesses, and I'll just try to pair accordingly, because if you don't address that, it's actually pretty tough. For those of you who are wondering, maybe you are struggling with Stormbringer, they attack very quickly, but they actually have a gimmick. I also have a guide video on boss mechanics on Stormbringer if you're struggling with this boss. I highly do recommend you check it out. He's not a difficult boss, especially once you understand his mechanics and what makes him do a lot of damage. I'll leave that like in the other video, which I think is going to be more helpful to give you like a video footage as well on how I tackle it too. So that is for this first part. Second part, really I don't think there's much I can say. Most of you probably are doing quite well in the second half. Fire MC S-Star, again, fire damage is always very solid. I think it's very strong against Cocolia as well. If you have Natasha as well, I think this combo will work better, because at least Natasha can cleanse off some freeze that you get, for example from Ice Out of Space in its enhanced state, as well as Cocolia, sometimes she drops that freeze thing and it's quite annoying. So Natasha cleanser definitely is going to help as well. I don't think 9 is as difficult as 10, which in my opinion takes the cake of the hardest battles of all, out of all 10 floors, definitely. Not only because it's the last one, but because you have two challenging halves. The first half is not easy by any means. These Aromaton gatekeepers have a boss mechanic that is, you need to understand how they work so you can do more DPS, so you are able to get at 3 stars. I found without understanding how they actually work, it's not very easy. Here you can see their imaginary rest as well, which means how you will want to pair your lineup is if you have banner characters like Lota, likely you want to play him in the second half. And let me just first start off with like the team I use to clear, and then we will break it down from there, and I'll explain to you like why I use that team. I use Zealer in the first half, especially because most of the bosses here, the two main ones, are weak to Quantum. The only character that's like not weak, or the only mob that's not weak to Quantum out of all of them that are trouble really is this Illuminated Dragonfish. They do AoE damage, fire breathing, and it's like defense down. If you are going for 3 stars, you want to ignore them. If you are not going for 3 stars and want to clear, you want to take them down as quickly as you can. So two different tactics for two different types of people. I will explain more for the people who are trying to push to clear this floor rather than the 3 stars. I think the 3 stars one I'll talk right at the end, maybe once I have all the combinations up. The second one I use is Pella. Pella is mainly for the defense shred. She does good amounts of AoE damage as well. There are better characters of course, but Pella is mainly because of this memory imprint buff here, not really because of the typing here. It's just to make use of the buff. I do have Silver Wolf, but I played her on the second half. I'll talk about it, why I chose that way after like the characters are on the board. For the defensive sections here, I played Natasha as well as Jepat. Jepat is very strong because of his freeze. You lock down the Aromaton Gatekeeper, makes it a lot easier to manage, especially since he doesn't have that illuminating strikes, the one that like makes your characters like vulnerable with the imaginary break as well. So I find that these two work pretty well. For the second half, the second half is definitely the harder set. I completed this in like I think 32 turns remaining. So the first set was definitely easier. I just played a defensive one. I didn't want anyone to die. If I wanted to speed it up, I would have swapped out Natasha, for example, for Esther, Tingyun, Bronya as well. These are all options available too, but I just wanted to try to clear it in one run, which I did, and I didn't want to like retry so many times to like take it 1 star by 1 star. And here's a quick tip for those of you who don't know. For those of you who are struggling with getting all 3 stars, you can actually go in with one team to get the win in at least 20 turns left. You have some characters that feint is okay. You just go in again with like a pure tank healer setup. You win with like 1 turn left and have no characters dead. You will still get that 3 stars. So that's a way to like, if you have more time and you really want to max the 3 stars, that's a quick tip that I have for you to how you can actually get all stars. For me personally, with this comp that I'm going to show you, I cleared it in one go. But of course, then again, not everyone has so many 5-star characters, which is why I'm trying to like explain why I put these characters down. So second set, I really like Yanting here, again because he addresses this Sanctus Medicus very well. I really like him up against these characters. He does very good amounts of damage too. Silver Wolf, of course, is for the defense break to combo very nicely with Yanting, and especially since this set, my main DPSs here don't have the weakness of Kafka in here, so I want to implant either Quantum or Ice so that I can break her much better or freeze her quicker too, so that she doesn't pop off and start destroying my whole roster. That is why I chose to have Silver Wolf in the second set. Of course, she synergizes better with Zealer in the first set with all the quantum weakness, but for strategic reasons, I chose to put Silver Wolf in the second set, and it turned out much better as well. I won this with like 24 turns remaining with all characters alive, so I felt that it was a pretty good move. My last 2 slots here were Luota as well as Yukong. These are the last 2 characters I played here, new characters. I just wanted to try them out in the same team. They work very, very well. Yukong as well as Luota, very good combo. You don't always use skill points here for her. Let me just change this to what I actually use here. So you don't actually use like so much skill points from Silver Wolf. Sometimes Yanting might not use his skill as well, especially if he has his passive up. So I found that pretty useful. As you can see, there's no aggro drawer here, so they all took damage, brought most of them like equally. So these 3 like kind of split the damage. She has 4.7k HP, he has 4.8k, she has like 3.2k HP. So they're all quite relatively tanky as well to split the damage. My tactic, how I actually ended this game was, you want to keep your characters at full health as much as you can because Kafka does a lot of damage with her follow-up attacks. You want some AoE to take down that small mobs, if not she has that follow-up ability that does even more damage. I felt that of course Luota was very strong here, but at the same time I have good bursts in my sub DPS, which is actually Yukong and Yanting. These are my main like damage dealing characters for this floor as well. So that is like how I 3-starred it. And for those of you who are aiming to do so, you could try to form a similar concept to this based on the tactics that I said. But those of you who are just trying to like clear the stage, what I would recommend is definitely you bring in more healers for the second set. You really want more cleansers. For example, if you have now is where I actually try to like be more relatable and try to put characters that people can use. You want to play, for example, your debuff cleansers like March 7, Natasha in the second half. You want 2 strong DPSs in the first set. Whether it's, for example, Su Sang, whether it's Dan Heng, these Hun characters, you don't want them in slot number 1. Your second slot most of the time would want to be either Pella or Silver Wolf if you have her. These are very strong damage reducing characters. If you were to choose, I would say the harder set is the second half, so put your better characters in the second set. It's also a lot harder. The first set, as also since like the first set you can easily just reset, it doesn't waste too much time, you want your second set to be more or less like a guarantee clear. So putting the first set as like your risky, like may not clear kind of setup does save you some time in the longer run too. So these are like some thoughts that I have. I think that Su Sang of course works better in the second set because of Kafka's physical weakness, so you can just break her to slow her down a bit, do more damage as well. Those are some thoughts as well. But other than that, pretty straightforward, I think, to get just the straight up clear. If you have Tingyuan, use him in the first set as well. I think he's much stronger, especially with the lightning typing of these monsters. So I think at this point, instead of showing you the video footage, I think it's more helpful of showing you like the character gear that I have currently. What are they using? What stats are they on? So you kind of know like what to benchmark. I'm not saying that I'm free to play. I'm nowhere near free to play. Just a quick disclaimer. I spend thousands of dollars on this game. But then of course, some of you have better ratios than me because I built every single character up. So I split my resources very, very broadly. That is why, like, even though I have put a lot of money in this game, I might not have the exact stats. Just a quick disclaimer. But these are basically like the stats I'm running for my characters here. Yukong here is my sub DPS for my second team. She does a lot of damage with her burst, especially with the defense break from Silver Wolf. Zila is my main DPS, as a lot of you who followed the channel know that I have a E6. But really the E6 doesn't do as much damage as a lot of people think. As you can see, it's just utility here, utility, some speed here, a bit more crit, but it doesn't really add too much. Not really like $2,000 worth of damage increase if you ask me. I think the main damage increase would come from In the Night if I were really honest. So that is my main DPS for my first team. Pella here is just a debuffer. I use this one to try to like squeeze out a bit more damage to clear faster. And I'm just running with any gear that I have that's leveled up. I basically like switch my gear around, so she's a non-core at this point. I do have her at quite high constellations or Eidolons. Dota is my healer for my second set. I'm running time waits for no one. I of course have build guides for all of these characters on my channel already, so you can go ahead and check it out too. I have him at E1, a nice attack buff that is significant, especially in a set that damage comes from 4 places, because it's Lota, it's Yukong, it's Silver Wolf, it's Yanting, all 4 deal decent amount of damage in the second team, and that's what I was aiming for. I didn't use these 2 characters, so let's talk about Silver Wolf, who's my debuffer for the second set. I'm using Resolution Shines as Pearls of Sweat. It's the second set, so as you can see here, I swapped this around actually. I felt that it was better to use this one in the second set so I get more defense break on the enemy to make use of the buff of the Memory of Chaos currently as well. I don't have her super well built, but this is what I'm running. Nothing fantastic. I have her at E1 with just a bit of energy restoration heal. A lot of you can get by, of course, if you have much better ratios than me, but as you can see, most of my characters are kind of mid in terms of ratios. Landau's Choice for Japat, he's in my first set as well. Not super well built. I have him at E2 with more chance of freezing and slowing the enemies as well. And last, I think I have 2 more characters here. Yeah, I have 2 more characters. So Yanting is my main DPS for my second set. I'm using the free Cruising in the Stellar Sea at Super Imposition 5. These are my Tracers. I don't have him like super well built, but I think it's still decent enough. Eidolons are E0. And these are his ratios, mainly coming from the dislike cone and some unfortunate stats. And Natasha is just my healer, just using a general, pretty straightforward. Most people will probably be running this as well. And yeah, that is my Memory of Chaos 6 through 10 guide. It's not as easy to make as 1 to 5 because I would be lying if I say anyone could clear it with any character. It does take a bit of planning, and I hope the level of resources, the thought process that I have does help you out in some way. I'll be making more videos as well on the Memory of Chaos 6 to 10 now that I'm a bit more freer. Let me know in the comment section below what you guys want to know, and I'll focus on that first so I can get this out to you so you can get more Stellar Jades as well. If you appreciate such content, like and subscribe for more of such future content, and take care. See you in the next video.